Hi everyone, I'm Ross Gianfortune. Welcome to today's GovFocus. As artificial intelligence becomes a growing priority for government, federal and industry IT leaders need to ramp up the necessary infrastructure to scale AI and to integrate it into existing environments and systems and everything. Today, we're going to talk about how agencies and industry are developing, scaling, and implementing emerging technology to further government mission. To talk about this, I'm joined by Colonel Jason Quinter, Commanding Officer, Marine Air Control Group 38, Amanda Bullock, AI Lead and Strategic Advisor for Generative AI at the Air Force Research Lab, and Chris Elsins, Director of Public Sector at Domino Data Lab. Amanda, I want to start out with you. How is AI impacting tactical decision making, and how do you encourage that development?
First of all, I'd like to thank GovCIO for having me on this panel. We're really seeing a push from senior leaders to have near real-time data on demand to make decisions. And part of that means that we can't wait for data calls, that we can't wait for someone to create a dashboard. And so they have to be able to integrate tools that use AI into that data in order to have those real-time on-demand decisions. And one of the ways that we're doing that is by really encouraging citizen data scientists and citizen developers. We want to give them the tools that they need to really go out and create these things because it's easy to take a person who is a business expert and teach them how to use these tools. It's far harder and much more time to take someone who is an AI expert and teach them the business side. So we really want to embrace and upskill our people in artificial intelligence, machine learning, generative AI, so that they have those tools at all different levels and all different classifications to really enable that warfighter to create the stuff on their own.
Colonel Quinter, I want to know how you are, as Amanda said, enabling those warfighters to do it on their own and encouraging them to bring that forward.
Yeah, I'll echo what Amanda said. Thanks for having me on today. We have a technical deficit right now. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, generative AI being a good example, is something that you can read about, in periodicals on the internet. It's kind of being infused into all sorts of different aspects of our personal lives. And but we don't have, at least in terms of the Marine Corps, we're kind of in a place where we don't have a lot of resident expertise. We have some officers that have gone to places like Naval Postgraduate School that have some postgraduate education in things like AI and machine learning, large language models, or just data science in general. But by and large, we're having to grow that knowledge and understanding of what it is before we could figure out how to use it across our tactical formations. But there's a movement across the Marine Corps and all different warfighting functions right now to try to accomplish that. Just from a real practical perspective, I think my background is in CJADC2, and CJADC2 is the sense, make sense, and act paradigm, playing off John Boyd's OODA loop from the 1950s. It used to be observe, orient, decide, act. Well, really in the sense, make sense, and act continuum for prosecuting targets, for instance, we can use from like the quintessential example of what we could use like artificial intelligence and machine learning for would be pattern of life recognition. So if you look at Palantir and Maven Smart Systems and Target Workbench, the special operations community has been using that technology for several years now, where they're using large data sets, mostly like high resolution imagery, full motion video, to characterize like pattern of life in their case, they were using it to target known terrorists or different adversaries. So that's a practical example of how we can use it. But I think by and large, across different warfighting functions, there's so many practical use cases with intelligence, logistics, even administration, like in human resources. I think we need the tactical network to be able to support large language models, AI, machine learning, which requires cloud computing, actually. And then we've got to aggregate that data in the right place, those authoritative data sources in the right place to be able to leverage that data for whatever it is we're trying to use. So hopefully that answers your question.
Sure. I mean, Chris, I saw you nodding your head. How are you, particularly on the scaling cloud notion and bringing industry in? So obviously you have a different perspective. How do you impact and make the tactical decision making more integrated into mission and integrated into different environments, cloud, all that stuff to make it really part of everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think great points were raised across the board there. That's one of the discussions that we're having ongoing, primarily with the Navy and where a lot of our efforts are focused. But how do you make it such that you have modern, scalable tooling living in a cloud environment, but also make it to where these kind of exquisite data sources that are coming off a variety of platforms within the military are accessible to the folks that can operate on it? How do you make the models accessible to other folks in the field that could make benefit of it, as opposed to them having to figure out kind of from ground up how to recreate the wheel, so to speak? So those are areas that we're in a lot of conversations around, and providing avenues to help scale these capabilities and avoid redundancies, and really offer the DoD efficiencies that can compound exponentially over time. One of the other pieces that really stood out to me when Amanda was talking about upskilling folks in the field to be citizen data scientists, and we've seen a lot of good work going on across DoD and different academies where folks are getting data science degrees and computer science degrees, and that's really exciting. We also put a lot of thought into how do we make the information that is being developed in the cloud intelligible to folks out at the tactical edge, right? Where it really matters. And one of the challenges that was shared with us is trust, right? The operators out in the field need to trust the models that are offering them information. Otherwise, they're not going to use them, and they're going to go to other means of making decisions out in the field. So there's a variety of ways that we think about tackling that, but some of the big pieces is making clear how well these models perform, what their limitations are, but also being able to monitor them when they're out in the field so that they can have a high degree of confidence that over time, the information that these models are seeing is comparable to the data they were trained on. Otherwise, they're going to be getting really bad results over time. So variety of other factors that go into it, but those are some of the big areas that we've been able to drive impact pretty quickly.
Well, sort of to that end, the difference between theory and real world use. So obviously in the research world, Amanda, I'll come to you with this. How do you do that? How do you turn that research into real world applications for the Air Force?
It is so critical to work with our warfighter, to work with our operations, to be on the front lines, to have our S&Es embedded into those areas, speaking to those people who are on those front lines throughout the entire process, from requirements gathering, all the way to MVP, checking, finalize, because too often we go ahead and we're really, really smart in the Air Force Research Lab. We're with some really great minds, and not everyone has had that experience in operations. And so it's critical to embed our S&Es into those environments and to use things like bluing trips and have them experience what it's like. And then sometimes even bring them out from the field into AFRL to help test out these experiments. I know in the operation-based vision assessment lab, they've been doing that with their boom operators, getting them in there to actually try the simulators, because it's the people who are going to be using these things in the field that we really, really have to ensure that we're not just saying, this is what you guys need. No, we need to know what they need. They need to tell us what the problem is, and then we as researchers need to fix it.
How are they taking that? How do you take this sort of stereotype in your head of the nerd and the big tough guy going next to one another and sitting at a computer?
I don't know. I might challenge that. It seems like Colonel Quinter might have a little bit of both of those things there. So I think, we are so passionate at AFRL about contributing and about doing what's right for our country and our people and protecting them, that I think it's a lot easier in our kind of environment, right, to do that. And the bottom line is everything that we do has to impact the warfighter. It has to transition to someone, whether that's industry or the warfighter or another DoD component. So if we're not doing something that's already taken into account where it's going to go, then we're doing it wrong.
Yeah, obviously I'm being facetious on the nerd and warfighter side of things because I know everybody's pulling on the same rope, certainly, and the full need to do that is pretty obvious. But Colonel Quinter, how are you seeing those uh, research components of AI turning into practical real world applications? I know you talked about it a little bit before, but can you expand on that and how you've seen it and some examples?
AFRL's like, one of the quintessential examples for that, or one of the best examples, because it's a research laboratory. Their job is to conceive ideas, create prototypes, get them in the hands of airmen, do modeling, simulation, testing, see what works, what doesn't work, and inform future requirements development, through the Air Force as a service, and then sometimes all the way up through the JROC, depending on what type of technology it is and how they're planning on using it. But yeah, those science and technology research laboratories are where I think all the magic happens for things like prototyping. And we've got some advantages now. We've got the new software acquisition strategy, the mid-tier acquisition strategy. It's not really new. I know that the letter that the OSD, the SecDef just signed from OSD recently is reinvigorating that. Kind of is just a reminder that, hey, we've got some mid-tier acquisition strategy to, kind of take the handcuffs off, so to speak, in order to move faster when it comes to software development. And that's really helpful, I think, for places like Air Force Research Laboratory. For us, Marine Corps Tactical Systems Support Activity is kind of our Marine Corps equivalent to AFRL. And I think that our commandant's been pretty clear in his planning guidance that we're prepared to fight with prototypes if we need to within the Davidson window. And so I think the way places like AFRL and MCTISA on the Marine Corps side get after that is with CRADAs and bailments. And we work with industry when we have a decent idea of what it is we're looking for. If we could articulate that to industry, we can move a little bit faster. From cradle to grave, it takes a long time to actually develop a requirement through the JSIDS process. If you're just following, acquisition law, when we have these research laboratories, we can move faster, and we can at least get a prototype into the hands of an airman, or in our case, in the hands of a Marine, faster, and then that prototype could be something like, technology readiness level 7 or technology readiness level 9. And we can get that feedback back to the requirements developers a lot faster than we used to be able to. So it's still not as fast as anybody would like for it to be, but it is faster than it has been historically. And I think back to the comment about data scientists, my kind of thought behind that is pretty similar. And I like to say every Marine's a technologist. And, in our personal lives, we are very comfortable, I think, using, iPhones, laptops. It doesn't matter what it is. I think we're a very tech savvy society in the United States. And so are a lot of our allies and partners. And depending on what you join the Air Force to do, or what you join the Marine Corps to do, you sometimes throw up an artificial barrier there. Like, yeah, but that work, this is my job, and I think that it's just getting people to accept that, no, you're actually pretty savvy when it comes to using technology, like using tech. We just want people to start thinking about ways they can use the same type of tech in their Marine Corps job.
I'd like to add something to that too, if I could. I could not agree more with what Colonel Quinter said, but I want to give a call to action for our senior leaders across the DoD. There's a saying, "Would I do that in war?" And we really need to consider that when it comes to software acquisitions and some of these accreditation, because we're not going to go as quickly as we need to outpace our adversaries if we're constantly hammered by, oh, but it's not done this way, or it's not done that way. And what Colonel Quinter is talking is exactly right on. And I think that we're seeing a real big push towards that. But we need to ask ourselves, would I do this if there was a war? When COVID hit, we all of a sudden had virtual ability to do virtual meetings, right? Never had that. And then all of a sudden in 30, 60 days, we had something stood up very quickly. So we need to think about that in everything that we do in order to win this fight.
Yeah, certainly the fullness of it needs to be brought forward so that the best can be brought out from AI and scaling it. And certainly I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about efficiency and AI as an efficiency multiplier, because I know there's a lot of talk about efficiency in government right now. So Chris, I'll bring it your way first. How do agencies figure out how to balance funding for AI acceleration, but also making sure things are efficient and tight and they're not wasting money?
That's the $1 million question now, right? We're seeing a kind of a total approach across government, both defense and civilian, where cost savings need to be justified. And Domino, speaking from our vantage point, our first 7 years going to market was in the commercial sector, and so that's always part of a go-to-market motion, right? You need to demonstrate how you're going to increase revenue, save costs, drive impact. And so it's not to say that isn't always a priority in government as well, but we are seeing finer scrutiny there. And so from our perspective, I think there's a handful of areas that you can look at, right, when thinking about creating a justification for introducing automation so that you can do more with less. I think the first is how much time can you save your people, right? That's typically the metric where we see the greatest efficiency gains. Project that we recently supported within DoD, we took folks that, they went from roughly 12 months to be able to not only deploy models, but retrain them, redeploy them, get them out to the far edge down to 6 days. And so if you start doing a calculation on the amount of manpower it took across that year, that was now shrunk to 6 days, and how much more you can do with that human capital as a resource, that's a big justification. Some of the other areas, though, that I think are important to look at is what happens if you are unable to drive that impact, right? So Amanda made reference earlier where our adversaries are moving quickly here. And so if you find yourself in a competitive scenario where they have introduced automation and can perform better and we cannot, there's costs to that. I think the other big piece, and we call this FinOps or financial operations, is just ensuring that you're being highly efficient with your cloud computing costs, because these can run away very quickly. And it's something that we've seen, working with industry for a variety of years, particularly when you're working with machine learning and artificial intelligence. These things are quite compute hungry in most cases. And so ensuring that you have cost controls, strong governance around how money is being spent, is something as simple as ensuring that you can, operate on your data where it lives, perhaps, as opposed to incurring egress costs, or ensuring you could spin down a machine after a given period of time, and things of that nature are quite important as well. The other piece that I'll mention, and I think this has always been true, but always an additional consideration when thinking about AI, is this innovation, force multiplier. It absolutely is. And then you think about the contrasting point where security and risk mitigation have to be managed in a similar discussion. That's an area that I would suggest people kind of keep a close eye on, and thinking about how you balance that trade-off in an efficient way. That's not always going to look the same, right? We've seen that marriage come together in a variety of different shapes and sizes, but having the ability to configure your tooling, your compute, orchestrate technology such that your people and processes can be, flexibly designed and to work with these capabilities is quite important. And we have a variety of ways that we see that play out in industry. Not sure it makes sense to kind of rattle off all of those here today, but it's certainly an area that I think requires continued focus in addition to more of the business justification and the cost savings.
Amanda, I wanted to come with you. I saw you were nodding at some of what Chris was saying about the FinOps and the compute and all the different parts of spend to save and those kinds of things on this notion. So how is scaling AI and efficiency? How are they working together? How will they work together going forward?
So I've had the awesome and crazy hair-pulling experience for the last 18 months of deploying, purchasing, testing some of the first generative AI tools in the DoD. And there's been a lot that has gone along with learning about that. And what we have quickly learned is that we need to work across the DoD in order to do this. Really bringing it up to the OSD level is going to be kind of critical, because there is such a big investment that needs to be made for this, that you can't really have these siloed onesie twosies. It doesn't make sense for the Marine Corps to invest in, the cloud compute for these models, and the Air Force to do it, when we could get a much bigger bang for our buck if we're going into it together. And then the second thing I would say with that is it's really important to embrace that hybrid architecture. And so part of what we've been leaning towards and looking towards in the hybrid multi-cloud, for modular architectures with a lot of these tools, so that we can quickly shift them. If one service provider, say, decides they don't want to work with us anymore, or their compute bill all of a sudden shoots through the roof, we have HPCs that we're now re-engineering to be capable to kind of run some of these models and do some of these inference for us to help drive down some of those compute costs. The other thing that I would love to ask industry to do is to really work with us, right? Let's work together and figure this out because it's going to be for the greater good of our country. And if we can kind of get these requirements, you're not just giving us a gigantic bill every single year that we can't, maintain. That's really going to be critical.
We mentioned it before, but I want to dig a little deeper into the people question and training and digital natives and things like that. So, Colonel Quinter, how are you making sure that you adapt your teams to manage and operate these advanced AI systems depending on their level of expertise and how they can integrate it more?
Depends on your specialty. I would say that there are some people, depending on their job, their military occupational specialty, that may just need to know how to use like a generative AI tool or something like that. The comm and the signals community across the different military branches, they need to understand things to a much with more depth. And what I mean by that is we don't really have cloud-enabled networks. Like it's cloud-enabled hybrid networks are not ubiquitous across DoD right now. In fact, I think all the services are in the process of moving into the cloud. But like what we need across DoD to achieve CJADC2 is ubiquitous cloud, from the flagpole to the foxhole, and every place in between. So everybody always wants to talk about the tactical edge, but the hybrid cloud is the tactical edge. It's also at the enterprise level in a data center back in CONUS. And so the comm community is responsible for the transport layer and everything behind that network that's required to make the network cloud enabled. And so incorporating things like SATCOM as a managed service, so proliferated low Earth orbit satellite constellations, like in our case, Starshield, and Viasat MMT, Chimeta LMT, things like that. And then the terrestrial layer, if you want to talk about all the way on the edge of the network, you need a terrestrial layer of your comm architecture that could also support a hybrid cloud all the way to the end user device. So in that case, I think the technology that we're going to mostly be reliant on is 5G Open RAN. We're going to rely on that, MANA radios and wave relay, and multiple input, multiple output. So for high density 5G cellular users, we're going to require MIMO. So those are technologies that we don't currently have across our formations in the Marine Corps. Or really, they're in pockets of places like wave relay and MANA radios are being used, have been used by SOCOM for several years. But we've got to proliferate those across every square inch of the network for the Marine Corps, the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, so on. So if you're a communicator, that's your responsibility. But we have other people that aren't responsible for the network that probably need to increase their baseline understanding of how cloud network architectures work before they could start to understand things like AI, machine learning, and data science in general.
Yeah, 100%. I know that the speed of this is very quick, but that's not to say that people can't keep up. Certainly, throughout the services. Now, Chris, I know we've talked a little bit about relationships that agencies have with industry, and industry has with agencies, the agencies have with agencies, the industry has with industry, all that stuff. Everybody working together. What lessons have you learned from these partnerships, and how might they serve as models to scale AI even more?
That's a good question. So, as I mentioned at the outset, right, we've done a lot of work in the commercial sector, and one of the big reasons we get brought in to help companies is because they're doing a lot of data science, AI, ML, different use cases, different stakeholders, different skill sets, often having to adhere to a variety of regulations. And so, historically, before there was an approach where you can kind of wrangle this in and provide efficiency, a lot of this was getting done in different silos, kind of like Amanda referred to, right? Which doesn't work for a variety of reasons, right? However, what we've found thus far is breaking down silos in a business across different business units doesn't have quite as many challenges as doing so within a defense setting, which has much higher security considerations that they need to be mindful of. And so while we've seen, similar collaboration internally amongst data scientists or folks, machine learning engineers who have to take these models into production, or test and evaluation personas that need to come in and approve a model before it goes out into a production environment, all the way to the end user operators, the war fighters who need to ingest this information in some form, right? Oftentimes being pushed out over API into a web application that they can interface with. That has a comparable kind of transition, but one of the areas that we've seen a slight nuance in outside of just the security considerations and the difficulty in breaking down silos, and that's a longer kind of conversation that is largely based on a variety of policies and defense. Not something that I'm going to convince anybody to do, but we're here for the ride. No, and I think but one of the interesting distinctions with government customers, and particularly defense, our solution in industry often can take you kind of all the way, right, to what you actually need. What I've learned working with the DoD is that we can typically take them 80, maybe 90% of the way there. And there are nuances to the work that they do that we just don't see in industry, or just don't have something pre-tailored that can go and address. And so it raises the requirements of collaboration for us to work with stakeholders in the government. Amanda mentioned this earlier, right? Ensuring that we understand what their needs are, and we're not kind of flying blind or just providing random suggestions, and really getting to the heart of the challenges, right? Whether they be architectural challenges, whether they be skill level challenges, right? There's a whole host of challenges, but once we have an understanding of what they are, we can efficiently work with them. And we've been highly impressed by a lot of the stakeholders that we work with in government and their ability to articulate the nature of their challenges, which we're just not going to have that subject matter expertise in industry, even if we bring some people in-house who used to work in these environments. And so the quicker we can get that information, the better we can work to develop solutions. And that might be us creating custom software. That might be us leveraging things in the open source community. That might be us going out to other vendors that we have relationships with and bringing them in to support. Or it could be us working with contracted developer teams, right, that are already working with the government, folks who are building out algorithms and things of that nature, where we can ensure that we're giving them from a software standpoint what they need to deliver these outcomes.
I do want to ask about the quick evolution, because I have talked about it and around it, but that brings us to the future. Like, what does the future of AI government applications look like, and what does it look like in a larger sense throughout government at scale? Amanda, I'll start it to you.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I will say that, we're probably 1 to 2 years behind our industry commercial partners in the real AI for everyone space. We've obviously been doing AI. We've been in the forefront for a lot of it in terms of our autonomous wingmen and our predictive maintenance. But this like AI for everyone, kind of how I view it, we're about 1 to 2 years behind, right? I think that the next, year or so in the commercial and the industry world, we're going to see the agentic AI really like taking hold. But I don't think we've really even gotten to RAG across the DoD or even AFRL. I know we haven't because I'm the one leading some of those efforts. So I think we're going to be about a year or two behind, and we're probably going to the next year for us is going to be looking at like how can we utilize RAG to help reduce risks of hallucinations. To really get to curating that relationship that you have with the data that you want. We've had a really good time experimenting and seeing how cool large language models can be to be creative.
Yeah, Chris, I know you talked a little bit about compute power and stuff. So how are you preparing for the quick evolution of AI, and what do you see as the future? Practical advice? Any things that you think are on the horizon?
Yeah, so where our kind of lens is focused is two of the three things that Amanda just walked us through. So yeah, we've partnered with our counterparts in government to do some experimentation around LLMs and generative AI. And I think over the course of the last year, a lot of this was around like, how do we use these? What are the limitations? What are the risks? What are the policies that we should be adhering to when trying to work with these models? And we are starting to see more of a transition as to how do we take these into production? How do we control for hallucinations, right? How do we ensure that these are production grade and that, we understand the risks, we're applying them where that risk threshold is acceptable, and thinking through how best to do that. The other thing that we've seen, and maybe this is more of a tone shift, but a lot of the conversations, I'd say last year leading into this year, were oriented around, we want, like, what can we use Gen AI for? Right? It was this awesome chat GPT moment, and very exciting. And now it's okay, well, what is this actually going to do for me, right? Like we've kind of got down to the brass tacks on it. And so from an industry perspective, we kind of recognize that most models aren't just ready again to be deployed and used, right, for certain outcomes. And so we've beefed out kind of our services arm to use this software in lieu of requirements that we see. Document summarization, supporting a variety of different applications is certainly one of the more popular areas. And then, yeah, we're also looking at agentic workflows, and I think that's a little bit out for everybody. There's a lot of talk on it now, and there's different theories, and papers being written on how best to approach. But that's where our product team is spending a lot of their time.
Colonel Quinter, I'll put the question to you as well. The future of scaling AI, what does that look like, and how are you tracking it?
Well, I think the generative AI is probably going to happen sooner. If you just look at the way people in their personal lives are interested in that type of technology, I think the more specific use cases for military application are obviously going to take longer to conceive and to bring to bear, like Amanda was saying. So those are the most interesting ones to me. I think that machine learning and artificial intelligence could has the potential to make everyone's job easier. And I think if you look at the big picture and you compare industry to the military or to the government in general, it's not just the military. We're not incentivized to move fast in any particular way. We're not for profit institution. If you don't move fast in the civilian world, in the for-profit world, your competitors gain advantage on you, and eventually, if you become so antiquated that you can't keep up, you go out of business, you go bankrupt. And in the government, we don't have that challenge or that threat to if you were going to do a SWOT analysis. So we have to be motivated by our own curiosity and our ability and our own desire to do our jobs more efficiently and more effectively, even when we aren't incentivized to do that necessarily. And so I think it starts with having a deeper understanding of all this technology and how it could be useful.
Yes, for sure. That's terrific, and it does bring us to the end of our program. So I certainly learned a lot of interesting stuff about AI development, scaling, how agencies are using it, and how they're implementing it. But Amanda, Colonel Quinter, Chris, thanks so much for joining me today.